Welcome to the NHL Wraparound podcast featuring Neil Smith, President General Manager of the 1994 Stanley Cup champion New York Rangers, and longtime ESPN NHL veteran Vic Morren. Together, they share no-nonsense opinions on news and issues around the National Hockey League. Whether you're a casual or diehard fan, each episode of NHL Wraparound will leave you more informed. Now, here's your hosts, Neil and Vic.
And welcome to NHL Wraparound, the last day of March 2025. Vic Morren, along with my good friend Neil Smith. And Neil, we're going to do some double dipping today. First, we're going to have Hall of Fame journalist and intermission analyst for NBC Sports Philadelphia, Al Morganti, joining us to discuss everything that has gone on in Philadelphia over the past week or so. And then you secured late last night former Washington Capitals head coach Bruce Boudreau to talk about Alexander Ovechkin, as he is now within 5 goals of the all-time NHL goal-scoring record.
And Bruce Boudreau and I played minor hockey together and share the same birthday. So how about that?
So that makes you both young.
I said birthday, not birth year. Birthday. So look forward to seeing Bruce on there. It had he was a good hockey player. And in fact, if he were of age now, I'm willing to say he'd be a great player in this NHL.
16th all-time in the AHL in goals scored in his career.
And if you look up his career with the Toronto Marlies in junior, how well he played 2 Memorial Cups back-to-back. The coach of that team, and I was thinking about this morning, and we never really thought that much about it at the time, but the coach was George Armstrong, the last Leaf captain to hoist the Stanley Cup. And he was coaching junior hockey. And at the time, it was just, that's Chief. That's George Armstrong. Like, it was not a big deal. Now, today, unfortunately, he's departed. But you would love to meet George Armstrong today and be able to talk to him about the 1967 Leafs and so on and so forth. And now we're talking about being back in the 70s, early 70s, when he was coaching the Marlies. And of course, that Stanley Cup had only happened a few years earlier, so it wasn't a big deal. Funny how life goes.
It is. We look forward to speaking with both Al and Bruce shortly. But first, 3 things you need to pay attention to, brought to you by UBS Financial Services, Inc. Number 1, Leon Draisaitl. The first to 50 goals this season, he gets the game-tying and game-winning goal in overtime against the Calgary Flames on Saturday. It's his 4th 50-goal season. But it's funny, Neil, because when you look at all the TV promos for games that the Oilers are going to play, it's always McDavid. And it's not to ever diminish the skill, the dynamic nature. We may never see another player as fast as Connor McDavid. But if you want a guy that's going to put a team on his back and he's going to carry them, I like Draisaitl a little more.
I've liked Leon Draisaitl since he came into the league. And I remember when Craig McTavish, my good friend, was in Edmonton, either coaching or managing. I can't remember which one it was. And they were sending Leon Draisaitl down. And I was like, but this is the guy you really need. You need that power center. You've got Nugent Hopkins and you've got all these other guys, but this is a special guy that you're going to have. But I didn't see him to be this good, but I did see him as a power forward that they really needed. And that's what he is. He's a power forward with incredible skill. I didn't see the incredible skill. He's better than Adam Graves, but sort of reminds me of the same thing of Adam Graves. You see that he's got that special quality of being able to bull his way through. And then all of a sudden you get 50 goals as well. Now Gravy only did it once, and Leon's done it 4 times.
Amazing player. And one of those guys that you always have to pay attention to on the ice because he's so much more than a goal scorer. I mean, his 200-foot game is terrific, and you feel that he's got a presence every time he's on the ice.
You know,
doesn't take his shift off.
A little bit of trivia here, or whatever. Isn't it incredible that superstars in the NHL are number 29 now? Like, and when I was growing up, there's only one guy that ever wore 29, and that was Ken Dryden, probably because one was retired and 30 wasn't there, and so he got 29. And that's the only guy I ever saw it. And then when people would wear 29, down the road, it would be like, okay, well, you got called up, you get number 29. You get so, but now you've got obviously McKinnon and Draisaitl both wearing 29 that are just fantastic players. And like him or not, the other number 29 that's been a pretty good player is our friend in Montreal, who's now wearing 92 because Ken Dryden's number 29 is retired, and that's Patrick Laine. The observation that 29 is a number that young kids are probably trying to wear in their driveway all the time. And who would have ever thought that?
New hot number.
Yep.
Speaking of 29, number 2, 9 straight wins for the St. Louis Blues. They pull even with Minnesota for the first wild card in the West, although the Wild have played one fewer game. Jordan Binnington, since the Four Nations face-off, you remember how people were questioning whether or not he should have been the goalie for Canada. So he wins that tournament. And then since then, 10-1.
Incredible. And I just think of our good friends, Doug Armstrong, the general manager, who's actually handing over the reins at the end of the year, but also good on Jim Montgomery, the head coach, who was fired early in the season by Boston and 48 hours later ended up as the head coach of St. Louis and now has done a fabulous job pulling that team together. And as I said to you the other day, without Colton Parayko for a good stretch here. So, and they made other moves that, they decided that they were going to move on from Brandon Saad. Now, Brandon Saad went on to Vegas and is doing a admirable job for the Golden Knights. But that was a tough decision by Doug Armstrong, and obviously it's working out because you don't get this kind of record without everything working properly.
And you remember that we had pointed out a somewhat soft schedule for the Blues through the first 8 games of this streak. So Saturday, they go into Colorado and get a 2-1 win. So just showing that this streak is no fluke.
No, and that they're able to play great defensive hockey against a great offensive team. And now next up for the Blues will be 3 straight home games against the Red Wings, the Penguins, and then back against the Avs again at home. So, you know what? They could end up in that 7 spot and end up, playing against Vegas, which is a lot better in anybody's book than having to play against the Winnipeg Jets, I would think.
We never know, but certainly what a run for them. And as you just mentioned, the schedule, a good chance for them to get to double digits in this winning streak.
Well, remember one thing before we leave this topic, Vic. I've been saying, and we've been saying for quite a while now, that in order for the standings to change and for some team to replace another team, it takes not only a miraculous winning streak, along with a catastrophic losing streak. And aren't you seeing that here by the injury-plagued Minnesota Wild has not been able to perform to the level they need to stay where they were in the standings. And St. Louis has put together this incredible run. So the two things together have made it very tough on Calgary and Vancouver, and real tough on Minnesota, who I can't believe are going to fall out of it, but there's a good chance they're going to end up having to play Winnipeg in the first round.
They are expecting that Kirill Kaprizov and Joel Eriksson Ek may return soon. They are now skating in practice with the club again. So perhaps some good news on the front for the Wild, but we'll get into that a little bit later because we have to hit topic number 3. The Toronto Maple Leafs now lead the Atlantic Division by 3 points after a 2-0-1 trip to California. The overtime loss was actually a shootout loss coming in San Jose of all places. But we've made mention, me in particular, that it would be very important for the Maple Leafs to finish first to avoid having to play both Tampa Bay and Florida in order to reach the conference final. But if they do indeed win the Atlantic Division, their draw is probably going to be the Ottawa Senators, who they're 0-3 against. So be careful what you wish for. Yeah,
and I agree that Ottawa's scary. It's sort of like the Rangers having to play the Islanders in the first round. It's a much bigger deal for Ottawa than it will be for Toronto. Because even when Ottawa plays their home games against Toronto, the building is full of Maple Leaf jerseys. So, look, for the Leafs, there's no good draw because they got to win. No matter who they play, they got to win. And that's all there is to it. And they're going to have to match the other teams, enthusiasm for the series, and they're going to have to play as hard as they possibly can.
It's going to be a great test to see whether or not the coaching change to Craig Berube for this season manifests itself into wins in the postseason. And that wraps up 3 things you need to pay attention to, brought to you by UBS Financial Services, Inc.
Well, it gives me great pleasure to bring in an old friend from many, 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 many years of working together. Al in the media, me running the Rangers, and had a lot of good times together. Al Morganti, welcome to NHL Wraparound, and thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's great to see you again. It's been a minute, as the kids say, to see what's going on, but it was quite a long, strange road it's been for both of us, I think. But you've got a lot more on your resume than I do, so you've got things that really matter a whole lot more than the stuff I do just covering it. So congratulations on a darn good run in the NHL and everything else that's gone in. You've always been a citizen of the sport.
Thank you.
Before we get going on the Flyers, how about those BU Terriers advancing to the Frozen Four? Your alma mater.
Yeah, they play. I mean, that's why my handle is Terriers, the Comcast, my email. Yeah, it's been Jackie Parker did me a big favor when he tried to walk on, and he said, you don't want to get hurt. Maybe you go to the newspaper. And he really was a big influence because as a student reporter, to treat you like a pro, it was a huge influence. And I've been kind of close to that program. I grew up with a lot of those guys on the 80 team, Rizzo and all those guys, Jimmy, Craig, and because they're all Boston guys. And it was another trip to the Final Four. And they're playing against, like, I've been a big proponent of Penn State. I mean, it's only been a dozen years or so since they were a club team. And I always said, that's going to be a monster. It's a freaking monster. You can't even get a ticket to that thing. It's crazy. I live in Philly. I'm like, I don't even consider Penn an Ivy League school because they won't have damn Division I program. It's a disgrace. So it is great to be you there.
Al, let's go over to the Flyers for a minute, and or not a minute, but a few minutes. And, my observations of the Flyers in the last few years, first of all, I want to say that I was really impressed with John Tortorella because, as Vic and I have spoken before, I always considered John a finisher. By that, what I mean is not a rebuilder, but a guy that once you had a team that was ready to go and ready to take that next step. That you could bring in a guy like Tortorella who would put in all that discipline and stuff and push them up to another level. But here he took this job in Philadelphia, and I knew he wanted it. He was excited about the opportunity to help rebuild a club, and he went there and did miraculous things. I mean, last year they were in the playoffs right almost till the very end. I know it went off, it went wrong for them at one point, and Washington went on a bit of a run, and so Philly didn't make it and Washington did. That's a year ago. But what a difference a year makes, because this year they never really seemed, the Flyers that is, never really seemed to get it on the rails completely. But at one point it totally went off the rails, and I started reading little blurbs about how the rebuild has hit its lowest point and I'm like, what? And so for you, a guy that's on top of it minute by minute, where did this whole thing go off the rails?
Well, Neil, it went off the rails no matter how long you cover hockey or how many new analytics you have. There's one basic truth that makes you a great general manager, a great coach, or anything, anything in an organization, and that's goaltending. And that's where it went off the rails. I mean, if Carter had still been a part of this program, they would have made the playoffs last year, and it would have been far different this year. I mean, that was, I've covered this team a long time, and they went generations without a goaltender. Then it looked like finally they got a goaltender, and that whole situation it's a horrible situation, but on a pure hockey sense, outside of everything else to it, it set everything back. Everything got set back. They would have made the playoffs last year. There's no doubt in my mind that would have been it. And then this year they come in and the goaltending wasn't as good. Now other things went wrong too. John's... He thought they were going to make the playoffs this year, despite the words otherwise. When you're in the room with somebody, like I give him full credit, like you, he'd been a finisher. But here, from day one, Neil, he bought into, I am part of this rebuild. I want to put my signature in the foundation, in the cement of the foundation of this. And he was on board. I mean, you're a GM. If you did what this front office did at trade deadlines, the coaches would have flipped out. And like last year, they let Walker go. But he bought into it. So usually when you see something like this at a trade deadline, I believe I've always seen coaches go into the locker room and like, let's circle the wagons here. It's us against management. This is what's left. But John was on board with management through this whole thing. So what happened at the end here, they just, frankly, look at their lineup. They've got a kid playing first line center, Cates, who's having a hell of a year, but he's the third line center. He's playing first line center. They don't have any big centermen. I mean, the Rangers one year Herb Brooks got through with the Smurfs, but you can't do that anymore. So it's what happened here. They really are bereft of big talent. Look, just before he got fired, he did a sit down with us on NBC Sports. And basically he said, and he's so honest, he goes, well, we're not that fast and we're not that big and we don't have goaltending. I'm like, oh my. it's like, how are you doing this? So that's what happened. And then unfortunately, I'm sure you get into it at the end. John, he's sometimes he's his own worst enemy. And he kind of, I think, wrote his own exit there at the end.
Something to say, though, that when he came in, and as Neil said, you come in, you know what you're signing up for. And even discussing with John before he even took the job, he was looking forward to the opportunity of really building this thing from the beginning. And I don't want to throw Chuck Fletcher under the bus here, but when John came on board, there wasn't a lot in the cupboard. There were a lot of young players that were probably brought into the lineup sooner than they were ready, and the team was cash strapped. So when you put the heart piece into it and the goaltending piece into it, they were really swimming upstream from the get-go here.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he knew going in. And, you might not want to throw him under the bus, but there's a whole city of hockey fans here ready to throw him under the whole SEPTA system on what happened here. But, that was the last part of the Flyers that said, let's go get the shiny toy. Let's get into this. Let's just buy our way out. You can't do it anymore. You just can't. The salary, it just because I've been around so long, I know the way things used to be done. And I used to love it. Big market, spend money. Even if you don't win the cup, you're in it. And that's what gets people all excited. Well, you just can't do that anymore. And they just got him and Kevin Hayes and Ellis still on the books and all this. I mean, they're just buried in dead money, literally, coming in. And that's what, but John was fine with it coming in, and he squeezed a lot out of it. Last year, I start to wonder at times, I just talked about goaltending. I wonder if good goaltending sometimes doesn't hurt you in terms of fooling yourself to where you are. If the Devils have a good goaltender but not much else, and I think at least if you want to look at whatever with this whole situation with the goaltending, I think removing their best goaltender kind of shined a light on what do you really have here. And I think that's what happened here. It's like, oh my gosh, what do you really have? And this year, the only thing that mattered, I believe, was Michkov. That's it. That's the only thing. You go in now and you look. Every other jersey that's sold is a Michkov jersey. It's unbelievable. And Tortorella was kind of assigned the task of bring this kid along, which is not easy. But Russians sometimes aren't the easiest to deal with. And this kid, I will give him this. He was coached hard in Russia. And I don't think it really bothered him that much, the Tortorella benchings and stuff, because he got benched a few times. But he's a better player for it. I mean, I watched Chicago come in, and I'm like, boy, if Tortorella had Bedard, he'd be 3 times the player he is, because he has no idea what he's doing on the ice except when he's got the puck on a wing or something. He's much better because of it. But there comes a point, and I love John, but it's one thing to have a doghouse. It's another thing to have a canine hotel. That doesn't work. And I think that's basically, at the end, a lot of that is what happened.
What I found interesting, Al, was in the first year, when he had a lot of these younger players brought up, the Farabys, the Frosts, and the Cates, that he wanted the team to be able to defend first, just in order to be competitive. And then in year 2, he made this more of a speed and transition team, which is not what he's typically done throughout the course of his career. And that was effective. They were particularly dangerous when they were shorthanded, and they created a lot of odd man rushes for themselves based on their speed and transition. And then this year, I thought that the style of play was moving in the right direction for them. But when you start to move your assets out, it kind of brings you back to square one again. And that's kind of what I saw happening this season.
Yeah, they're actually a pretty good team off the rush. And last year, when everybody said, well, they're a hardworking team, it was kind of, I'm not saying insulting, but you didn't get to the real issue. They were fast. They scored off the rush. They were faster than people thought. I'll put it that way. And they would score off the rush. And you're right. There's defensive. He made sure everybody could have a defensive structure. And most good coaches do that. I mean, it's one thing to say you want to do it. It's another to have the discipline. And that's where some of the benchings came in to go. But last year when they lost Walker at the trade deadline, this year Farabee and Frost, I meant at the trade deadline. Lawton, I mean, you would have thought they lost Wayne Gretzky talking to guys in the locker room. I'm like, I liked him. He's a really good player and a really good guy. But look at how he in Toronto. What you really see as a player, he fit in as a leader here, as a character guy, and that's where I think their biggest strength turned into their biggest weakness. They had a really good, quote, room, as people in hockey say, a really good room. I mean, especially playing for John to be like that. And this is, mind you, Tortorella benched, Couturier, his captain. He benched everybody basically, but they had a really good room. But at the trade deadline or just before, when they moved those pieces out, man, you would have thought they traded, Draisaitl, McDavid. I mean, it was incredible because they were so close. It really hurt. And I'm like, how can this be that? But it really did hurt. And you saw the effects of it. So when Tortorella continued to coach the way he does, or John, he's not going to surrender any ground, right? I think there wasn't as much scar tissue as he thought he'd developed already.
Al, before we go on to the more about the coaching, I want to go back. As I'm listening to you, I'm thinking to myself, you know what? I got to bring this up, and it's not meant to at all be negative, but I do want to bring this up for people that are listening. I consider Jay Snyder a friend of mine. We've had him on here. We had a really good show with him and Bernie Perrant celebrating the Cup in 1974 and the anniversary of it. And it was really, really a lot of fun to do. And I got to tell you, all the years I was with the Rangers and with Detroit, I always admired Mr. Snyder and the way he ran the Philadelphia Flyers. There were a few owners in the league that you could depend on that every year were trying to win. They were doing whatever they could to win. And Mr. Snyder, Ed Snyder, the original owner of the Flyers, was one of those, along with the Ilitches and others. And those organizations were pretty good. Like, they were always pretty good. I mean, they're not always going to win the Cup every year, and you're not going to make the playoffs even every year, and particularly now with 32 teams. But they were classy, and their owners were angry if they weren't classy and if they weren't good. And so then obviously things move on and the team is sold. And now the ownership is Comcast or whoever. And, they still, it seems to me, went back to the old guard being, the older Flyer players that were still around, that they were still listening to, and they end up hiring Chuck. And the reason I bring this up is because Chuck Fletcher himself told me this. He said he got a call from Paul Holmgren, and Paul said, "Are you interested in being GM of the Flyers?" And he's, well, yeah, of course. He says, "Well, come on in. I think you could end up getting the job." So he was like, because he was sort of happy but stunned. And anyways, so then Chuck Fletcher becomes GM of the Flyers, and then things don't go so well, and he hires John, and then things don't go well, and then they let him go, and they make Danny Briere his assistant, the GM, and they bring in Jonesy from the broadcasting, who's a very popular Flyer and popular in the community. And the idea that I got from those people was that they wanted to raise a level of popularity in the community, stop the negativity that was out there about the Flyers. And so Jonesy could do that. And Danny Briere was the next up as far as a potential GM. He almost got the job in Montreal. And so he became GM of the Flyers. But do they have the experience now, when you think back to the Snyder model and you think today's Comcast model? Does this organization from top to bottom have the experience to be able to guide this ship out of the fog that it's in and towards the promised land? Because when I think back of the history of the Flyers, that's what I'm trying to bring up. That's what made them so special, was the way that they were run from the very top. Yeah,
I think if the pro sports model was like it was, maybe you could answer no. But I will say with Danny, he did a lot of homework in this. I mean, it wasn't like he just jumped into this. He went to the minor leagues, ran franchises basically. Was very well thought of. In fact, with the Montreal job coming up, he's pretty shrewd that way. I think that what they were looking for was And Chuck, to be fair, was kind of still the old system type of a thing, like go get people. And I mean, he was kind of given those marching orders. And then they finally realized we can't do it this way. We're going to have to change the model, which I think is why perhaps you could get away with, but why this might be more smarter, a smarter way to go, the rebuild. But you're on to something with the fact that Jonesy, like I worked with Jonesy a long time, that I do think buys them the ability to have the fans be patient with what's going on, like to trust, to have somebody that you can trust, that he's going to tell you the truth. And I'll tell you, Neil, that the reason, I think part of the reason they get away with it or can sell this in Philadelphia is the candid way that they do this. And that included Torts, which was very important because you have an old school guy saying, we're not going to rush this. We're going to do this the right way. Basically saying, we're not doing it the old flyer way. We're not doing that. We're not going out, get that shiny toy we can't really afford anyway anymore. We're going to do this. And that's why the fans, and I deal with them every day, basically, are more than, they're anxious now, but they were ready to buy in. So I think that they're fine in their positions. We'll see now with the draft picks that they've had. You know what that's all about. I mean, if you don't hit there, you're screwed. I mean, these fans are smart, and they realize this thing went off the rails with Nolan Patrick. That's basically, this is when it went off the rails. I mean, every show we do, if I say Cale Makar, Scott Hartnett would say should have him. I mean, or Heiskanen, one of those things. And so that's why they're kind of buying into this right now. There are a little, but when you look around, Neil, at the front offices everywhere, I mean, it's a different animal right now. And it's not analytics driven. And the best still have players, I think. And that's why they trust this, because I will say, and another defense of Chuck, he was the GM and the president. That's tough. That's tough to manage up when you're in those positions, and to be the financial guy and the hockey guy and the whole thing. That's pretty tough. So that's why this is now a two-headed monster. This was a three-headed monster, a three-headed organization with Torts in it. So I don't question their abilities to do it. Their inexperience and all. I think they certainly have it, and I really do think Danny learned a lot. And just talking with them, they talk in the new language with the players' angle on things, which is very comfortable for fans. But having said that, I think the most important thing Danny said after the Tortorella dismissal, firing, whatever, was that he thinks they hit rock bottom. Once you say that, you have to start adding a little bit for him to, like, I'm not sure it is rock bottom. Personally, looking at it, I don't know. I look at this, I'm like, he's the goalie. Well, what do you got? What are you going to get here? But I think they're feeling what you're talking about right now. They're feeling like we got to go get something to kind of, frankly, sell tickets to go on here.
Do you see any movement with them this summer? They're going to benefit with the cap going up somewhat, but the real relief doesn't come until July 1st of 2026.
I don't know, Vic. I don't know what I look at it and trying to be optimistic and go, well, they got to get a big centerman. When am I going to get it? I mean, is it Luchenko coming? I mean, he's a kid. It's like he's one of the youngest kids drafted in his draft year. He played okay when he came up, but I don't know if you can lay that on him right away. I wanted a guy like Brock Nelson, Nelson to come in, maybe give him a short term, see what happens coming in. In Dallas, they had a veteran player come in 2-year, 1-year contracts, maybe something like that. I don't know that they can find that guy. But I don't think, despite his fact that he said rock bottom, I don't know that they're going to go necessarily. In the first place, they don't have that much money unless they can, somebody, looking to get money on their books gets Ellis before the start of the season, something like that. Maybe they can do that. Couturier is not going to go anywhere. Double back surgeries for a long-term contract. I don't know exactly where they can go. And when you look at their, I guess I call it a bushel full of bees. They've got Bonk and Bump and Bjarnson, the goaltender, and then they've got all those bees coming up. But I don't know that that's next year either. And they got a goalie in Russia. I mean, I can't believe I'm still talking about goalies with the Flyers. You mentioned Bernie Perron earlier. I'm like, they still look at Bernie at 80 years old. Like, can you come downstairs for us? I mean, they have had Hextall and they're all, but in Pelly Limber, the whole thing with goalies in this city, I don't know what's going to happen. I know one thing from what I've seen from the Russian and the Belarusian they have. I don't think they have. I don't even know if they're NHL. Certain nights I watch them to see, and Ersson looks like a really, really good secondary backup goaltender now, really good. But I don't know if he can be a number one. So I don't know if there's a quick way out of it this summer. But I do know that there's going to be something coming, because once you say, like I said, Danny said, we hit rock bottom and we, subtracted. There's got to be some sort of addition here this summer.
Lastly, Al, I'm not going to ask you who, but with the coaching, the coaching vacancy, what would you expect the direction that they would go in? Would they go to a younger, less experienced teaching type of coach? Would they go to a guy like, and I'm just throwing a name out, not him specifically, but a Jerry Gallant type of person? What direction would you expect them to go?
I think they're open to. I think they're open to either option, and I think the interview process will be important on what this coach expects. The name everybody talks about here, of course, is Tocchet. I don't even know that he's going to what his situation is going to be. I know one thing. Anybody I know that's ever been in Vancouver can't wait to get out. So that's not a beautiful city and all, but man, you think the fans are crazy here. Man, there's nothing there. You're up against it every day. But I think that might be an option there. Carl, I don't think so. I don't think at that point, a lot of the learning has been done. I mean, Torts, I give him a lot of credit. I think much as these guys might chafe under it now and kind of be a little bit pleased that they don't have to deal with it anymore, I think they did learn. So I don't know that the teaching has to be that part. I think they have to have this weird combination of somebody that is willing to live with a team that probably isn't going to be a playoff team, but is expected to be good. When you live here, when you live in Philly, because everything's intertwined in Philly, because of what the Sixers did, you can't really have a process because it's a negative now. Because the Sixers kind of pulled a curtain up on all the sports and said, we don't have to have a person in the building. We're going to make money. That's what we're going to do. It doesn't matter. But it was ugly. So what they want to do here is still rebuild. It sounds dumb, but can we lose 4-3 and Michkovs gets a hat trick? That's like the dream, right? To see what happens, to bring everybody along, to go that way. So I think they're going to have to deal with a guy that can deal with some of the losing. So I don't know I think Tocchet would be good. I mean, I actually think, I don't know what's going to happen in Pittsburgh. I think he'd be a good fit. I have no idea what the situation is going to be in Pittsburgh. I know he's Yeah, he's tight with Torts too. So there was no way he was going to take a job if it meant, now that there'd been some distance, if that happens, that I think would be something that certainly would fit here. But who knows what's going to happen there. And in this league, I mean, let's face it, that, hockey coaches are like golf tees. I mean, use them, move on, the next hole, right? That's what happens. So maybe it's a situation where you don't necessarily, see what happens we get somebody. And I'm not so sure. Brad Shaw, he seems like an assistant to me. He's a really good assistant. I mean, their defense, you look at the Ristolainen's advancement with him, the way he's played. New York's still a project there, and they've got others. But you look at I look at what he did with Ristolainen, and I'm like, wow, he really made him into a player that can stay in his lane, so to speak. So, I mean, I'm not convinced that, even though he might not be the quote head coach guy, but you might just be trying to have a bridge here to whatever happens eventually in Tampa, Florida, who knows what could happen. So that could be in. But you know what, Neil, more important than I don't know, I honestly don't think that they do, because I don't think that this was in the plan. I mean, this thing unraveled with John. As you know, when you hire John, there's going to be some rough spots. But I don't think they expected this thing to unravel the way it did so quickly at the end. I think they could have nursed they might have been able to nurse another year out of this thing. So that's why I honestly don't think their firing wasn't because they had somebody in their sights. It was because it was just time because of all the benchings and the arguments he had with York and everything that went on.
Yeah, it's that's what you get with Torts. I mean, everywhere they say it, Columbus, they love him. John Davidson loved him, but Torts is a petulant guy, and he's going to do it his way. And sometimes he ends up trying to fight the other coach, or he tries to fight his own player. Yeah. Or he tries to fight Larry Brooks.
Yeah. Torts is going to tort. But I will say, like, he's my 19th coach here now, Shaw. Okay. So I've seen a few come and go, and I've dealt with him from Pat Quinn to Keenan but I will say with Torts, he never quit. Like, his strength to me was when you bench a guy or whatever, when you pipe a guy even for a period, usually with Torts, it's like, I'm doing this because you let the team down. When I covered Keenan, there was a problem because it was like, you let me down, me. But Torts, it was more, you let your teammate down. And that's why I think they could live with it a little bit longer. But at the end, it became like, we're on national TV and Tortorella's benching Michkov and Tortorella. I mean, it's like, okay, it was too much Torts. But I don't think it was necessarily him trying to, but he was just a teacher that just said, I don't care where you are right now. You did this wrong. I'm going to give you an F, and we'll start again tomorrow.
Very last thing before I say goodbye is, what is with the sweater on the coach behind the bench for the Flyers? I've always wondered, how did that get started? Where the only coach in the league that doesn't have a suit on?
Well, I remember, didn't Robbie Fatorik wear a sweater when he was with John
remember the defenseman Jean-Guy Talbot wore a sweatsuit.
Yeah,
but
I think Torts just is well, I know because he lives out by me. He's got this big farm. I think it just doesn't want to get the horse manure on the suit. It's just he's casual. But even he was even casual to the players coming. On the road would come in on track suits or whatever you want to call them. And players like to dress up. So I think they'd rather be able to show their feathers rather than come in with that. But that's all it is. It's just that was his his kind of style that he is. He's not a guy that's got much in terms of I want to show you my latest $10,000 suit or whatever. So it was just an easy way to go. I do see more and more though. Like in Philly, we're used to, like, Jay Wright used to have $1 billion suits for Villanova, although they wish he could come back now with a T-shirt. It really helped things out. But it would be like, it's like, okay, that's just Torts. He doesn't care about that stuff. I wonder if he's going to go back on TV. I really do wonder where he's going to go. He always led me to believe this was his last rodeo. But I don't know with Torts. He doesn't want to be part of a front office. You know, I hear rumors about the Bruins. I've even heard Ranger rumors. And I'm like, I think he might actually relax for a while if it's possible with him.
If it's possible, but he does love dogs. So,
my
that's
gosh.
the thing
Lord,
maybe,
the dogs. That's the one thing here that, you know, Hockey and Hounds, all the charities and stuff like that. He was great with dogs, which I guess is why I didn't mind putting the player in a doghouse.
Well, Al, thanks so much for doing this. Vic and I really appreciate it. And your insights are great. And I love to just listen because the folks we get on here, like yourself, know so much more than we know and that we can see from our television set or whatever. So thanks for helping us understand a little bit more of what's going on with the Flyers.
No worries. Nice to see you guys. It's been a bit. Both looking great. Love the hat over there.
Thanks, Al. Great to have Al Morganti joining us to update us on everything going on in Philadelphia. And a reminder that Neil and I will be back with New York Centric on Tuesday and short shifts on Wednesday and Friday. And Neil, time for you to introduce our next guest.
Yeah, our next guest is, I don't think I can get a guest that I've known as long as I've known this guest. Bruce Boudreau and I go all the way back to George Bell Arena, and 16 years old, 17, maybe 15, 14 years old. I played for the Butter Beeps. You were always a Marley. Bruce was a Marley from all those years. I played for the Toronto Red Wings and Toronto Nats, and Bruce was with the Marlies. And I got to tell you, folks, and Vic, Bruce was an unbelievable player. Like, he really was an unbelievable offensive player. And Bruce, I said before you came on here and before we started the show, I told Vic, I said, had he been today's Bruce Boudreau, this is your style of play would fit today like incredibly. And that's the type of player you were. You were an amazing offensive player.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'd like to think how it would have gone if I was in today's game. I mean, obviously, back in the 70s and 80s, the whole game was slower. So, I mean, if you put all that up and your speed would have increased to the way they are today, I think I would have had some success. But you know what? Things happen for a reason, Neil. I mean, we love the game. I think if I was a better player, I wouldn't have been a coach. And somehow that's how it worked out, that my coaching ended up being more of a career than my playing. Even though I played for 17 years, I think of myself and what I do these days as look at games as a coach rather than as a player, I think. So it's been great. I mean, we've been in this business for over 50 years now. Like when you think about it, how friggin' old we are. I mean, do other people have careers that they do and that they have that last 50 years in something that they love, no matter how many pitfalls or how many times it knocks you down, we keep getting back up because we love it. So it's pretty wonderful.
Well, we share a lot in common, both being Toronto kids and both having the same birthday. As I reminded you of through a text there when it was your birthday and my birthday a few months ago, that was always something I knew about. And don't ask me why I knew about that when you were playing for the Marlies. And I would go to do you remember they used to let the Marlies into the Leaf games?
I remember that, yes.
And so I would go there and say I was Bruce Boudreau. And of course, the usher didn't know who was who, right? All you had to do was say a name that he recognized and he let you into the Leaf game. And of course, I was always you because I knew we had the same birthday. Not that you had to show ID. We probably didn't even have ID back then.
No, I'm sure I didn't. And you go through the same door and it was funny how that used to be. And I used to just love going to the Leafs games back then and in awe, just watching as we'd mentioned to George Armstrong or somebody play and just dream about what it would be like to play at that level. So pretty cool.
Quick question: do you remember ever going to the double headers at Maple Leaf Gardens when St. Michael's and the Marlies would both play a game and back to back on the same ice?
Yeah, all the time. I mean, I would take the bus down, and my parents would just pray that I came home, because it was long days on those Sunday afternoons that you would watch the double headers. I mean, it was, and those were the guys you just sit there and you'd go. You couldn't wait to go to practice the next day because you wanted to be like them. So I mean, it was a real good part of wanting to do what you do, and it's we're lucky.
Brad Park on the Marlies, I remember that, watching Brad Park play for the Marlies, and then there were so many great Marlies. But anyway, let's. The younger people out there will be saying, "Come on, get to today. We don't want to hear about all this crap." Bruce, obviously everybody knows you coach the Caps, but I got to ask you, because where we are with OV and the chase for Gretz's record, you had him, and did you ever think while you had him that he might be able to threaten Gretzky's record like this, because he was such a prolific goal scorer?
Yeah, you know what? That thought never occurred to me. I always thought Wayne's records are going to last forever, and yet two of them are going to be broke this year. But no, I just thought he was a great goal scorer. I never thought I had him in his second year through his sixth, and when he was just getting going, to be quite frank, and I just thought he was an amazing athlete. We tell people, I do the Caps, a lot of Caps pre and post game, and telling the people that people forget, like they think he just scores coming down the wing and shooting the puck, and that's only part of him, because he's 230 pounds. He goes to the front of the net, nobody can move him. You look at yesterday's goal, for example. He just stands there. You can't move him, so he tips pucks. He's got that IQ. He draws people towards him. Whereas you can take other great goal scorers, and like say Patrick Kane, for example, in his heyday, still had to score from a little bit from the outside. All of these guys that don't have Ovi's size and strength, he could do it the finesse way and the shot way, but he did an awful lot by being in the blue paint in the trenches. And so when you got a guy that's got that kind of combination, and the shot to boot, then, you think he can score a lot of goals. Did I think he was going to approach 900? No, I didn't think so. But then I couldn't even think that high, let alone imagine it at all. So, but that's incredible what he's doing.
Bruce, when you started out coaching him and it was your first game in the NHL, he was already 100 goals into his career at that time. Can you speak to how coachable he was? Because obviously great players see the game a little bit differently than maybe the lunch pail guys and even their coaches. So can you speak to what it was like to work with him and help evolve his career?
Yeah, you know what? That's a great question, because a lot of times with young guys like that, you just let them go. I think you had Al on Mitchkoff would be that kind of player. Torts was really trying to bring him into playing more complete game. When I first got Ovi, he would like to take a minute and a half to a minute 45 second shifts, and you had to rein him in. And he didn't really like the back checking portion of the game. But I think everything, if I had thrown everything at him all at once, it wouldn't have been good. He would have just said, no, that's it. But little bits and pieces. I started with the ice time. Let's keep the ice time. If we can keep it down to 50 seconds to a minute for you, Alex, not a minute and a half, then eventually we'll get it to 45-second shifts after a while. So, But he still didn't buy into it right away. What I had to do was I had to show him statistics on paper on when his shifts were shorter in a game, his production increased and the team won. when his shifts were longer, he didn't get as much, and he was like bigger minuses, and the team lost. And once he saw it on paper a little bit, then all of a sudden he said, hey, I get that, coach. Now I understand a little bit what's going on. And so, so you start with that. And then like my second year coaching him, I said, hey, you know what? Why don't I try you at penalty killing, which was a brutal failure. A, he didn't like to block shots, and B, he didn't like to come into his own zone a lot. But when you're penalty killing, those got to be two things you got to be thinking of. So we stopped that, and I told him, I said, Alex, what I'll do is now I'll put you in the penalty box every time that there's a bench penalty or something else, so you can be the first one out. And he said, yeah, I like that better. So, he didn't like the penalty killing aspect. The other reason is because it took away from offensive aspect, and he wanted to be scoring goals. So he didn't want to get 20 minutes of ice time a night and 3 of it be on penalty killing. He'd rather have 20 minutes offense at night or time on ice at night, and that be more on an offensive situation. So, but everything morphs into it. Like once he got older, he started to get a little bit more mature. His shifts started getting a little shorter. He started to think a little bit more about the defensive aspect, and he'll never be great at it. And I don't think as a coach, I expect him to be great at it. His job is to score goals. If he can neutralize, that defensive work will not be a detriment when he goes out there, then I've won the game. And I used to say this, Neil, about a lot of players is if his good outweighs the bad, I will be, I'm going to be pretty happy, and I'll try to work on the bad, but I'm not going to forsake the bad or forsake the good, trying to overdo the bad. Does that make any sense? So that's how, I worked with him and showed him. He wanted to watch a lot of video. I don't know if he paid attention, but he wanted to watch it all. And so he would come into my room, and we'd do a lot of individual stuff, just watching the video. And I'd ask him more questions than he'd ask me.
There's a piece of his evolvement that he almost has an aura around him, or a halo, so to speak. And where I'm going with this is when he started his career, he would hit everything. The guy's a specimen. And he was probably the ultimate example of power, pure power and skill. And because of that, as the years have gone on, he has been able to pick his spots when he has been able to engage in physical play. And a lot of players don't really engage in him. I think, save for the broken leg that he suffered back in November, most of the injuries he has suffered over the last several years have been on hits that he has initiated. So where I'm going with this is, I think a testimony to his longevity and the combination of the productivity is because he has been able to create space for himself because of his physical nature early in his career.
Absolutely. I think when Ovi was facing another team, the last thing the other team wanted to hear is, okay, you two defense are going to be playing against Alex all night, because we got to be right on top of him. We can't let him have any space because of his shot. And so they would try to be physical. And Alex would always say, you want to be physical against me? I'm going to come out instead of the hunter. I'm going to be the hunted. I'm going to become the hunter. And then every time the puck was, they'd throw it into that defenseman's corner. And I remember Tim Gleason, and I remember the Komisariks and the Gonchars, and all of a sudden, by the end of the first period, they don't want anything to do with hitting him because they're more trying to avoid him. And then he'd have sort of a lot of free range during the evening because he's already set that tone. Like, I'm coming after you. If you hit me, I'm coming after you. And I think that worked wonders. And one of the things that people don't understand is when you say he's a specimen, his knees are twice the size of a normal man's knees. So, that's why he had no knee problems. Every time he'd go knee on knee, and he did it a lot, the other guy would get hurt because his knees were so big and strong and powerful. And I mean, his whole lower body was so powerful, which is why that broken leg really surprised me. But you could see that where the whiplash hit him in November when it happened. But he's been relatively injury free when it comes to other than pulled groins and hamstrings and stuff. Like, I mean, the actual injured part of the thing, he's been pretty good with that. So, but when you're the hunter, it's a lot different. It's a lot easy hitting, as Neil would know, than being hit. And it might be the same kind of together hitting, but I mean, it's a lot easier and less painful when you're doing the hitting.
That's for sure. Bruce, this year's Capitals are such a great story. And the Alex story is just icing on the cake for just a magical season that they've had. And if you break it down, almost everything that Chris Patrick and Brian McClellan have done there has gone right. I mean, and they've even had a couple of reclamation projects that I envy because I know how hard that is to find one. They got Pierre-Luc Dubois in there, and all of a sudden they got out of him, or the coaching staff and the management has gotten out of him what people saw many years ago. And yet it took 2 or 3 different tries from teams. Finally, in Washington, they're able to get it. The same thing with Strome. Strome wasn't too successful until finally he lands in Washington, and then he becomes the Strome that everybody thought he could be. Jacob Chychrun, still don't understand why Ottawa ever traded him, but he all of a sudden is a $9 million defenseman for the Caps. I didn't see that coming. I mean, I knew Chychrun and I knew he was pretty good, but I didn't think he was elite, and he certainly is elite this year. And the goaltending changes that they made this season has worked out for them with Thompson and Lindgren. Yeah, Lindgren, and so I mean, it's just been a magical year. And I guess where I'm trying to get to with all this is now the playoffs are going to start, and it's going to be a totally different animal. And that, as you well know, than the regular season. Will they have spent, will the distraction of Ovi's record-breaking chase and the magical season that they've had where almost nothing's gone wrong, could that interfere when the playoffs start and adversity begins to pick up?
Well, I mean, I think every team needs adversity at some point to be successful, because you got to come out of it. I don't think the record chase, because when I'm watching the games, and I mean, the players, they're not overfeeding Alex. Alex is doing the things that he's doing, and they're going in the net. So I don't think that's going to be as much of a problem. But you're 100% correct here when you're saying they've had Chris and Brian have had everything go right. There's nothing. Look at. Do you realize that the same 6 defensemen have played in 60 straight games? Like, I mean, not one injury. They've got, I think it's 13 players that have played in every single game this year. That doesn't happen, and I will, the other thing I'll say is that I worry about them, and is that teams that win the President's Trophy, or right up there winning it, they usually play as good as they can most of the year. Like, they have to be that winner. And I think one of the reasons that they don't win the cup is because in the playoffs you got to play at least 10% better, maybe 20% better. I don't know if there's room for them to play any better right now. So I mean, if they can't pick it up and play better, then teams like teams that do pick it up could catch them. You know what I mean there? And that's the biggest worry I have. And like when I say, and I like Spencer to me is going to win the Jack Adams as the coach. But I mean, I wish he would get his other 2 defensemen. They've got Alexeyev and McElrath that they haven't played since November. And I think when it comes to playoff times and everybody's hitting more and skating faster and everything else, and people get injured, they're going to need some of these guys. I think he should be putting them into a game or two. And I just watch from afar and I say, is he trying too hard to win every game when they've got everything comfortably right now? Should he not be getting more people into the game? That's my only question mark on that team this year. And I wondered, but I mean, they're doing everything right as far as everything else is concerned in my book. But that's where my worry comes about the Capitals right now.
Do you see, though, that with the expectation they're going to see one of these, quite frankly, mediocre teams that are going to finish in the 8th seed, and that it will allow them perhaps a little bit of margin of error against one of those clubs, be it Montreal, the Rangers, Columbus, Detroit, or the Islanders, that get in, that maybe they don't have to play their best to get to the second round. And at the same time, they will be able to acclimate to what it is to be a number 1 seed.
Yeah, I agree. But I've gone through it in 2010 when we won the President's Trophy. My fear is if they play the Rangers and Shesterkin gets overly hot. Montembeault, they say, can be a great goalie. I've seen mediocrity in it, and the Islanders have a good goalie when they want him when he's on, and so I mean the goaltender can be the difference maker. But I mean, all of a sudden, teams that get in there, and it's how you get in there. I look at just to change the dynamics. When St. Louis gets in there, they're going in maybe as an 8th seed, but the best team in the NHL playing. So, I mean, it's when you get in there too. So to me, the first round in whether it's 1-8, 2-7, 3-6, 5-4-5 is the toughest round. Because once you've won that first round, you say, okay, now we know what the playoffs are all about a little bit. We know we have to step it up. But when you get in there in a short series, and I mean, it might take you 2 games to wake up and go, well, this isn't, we're a little bit behind the 8 ball now. So, I mean, you got to worry about it. So, I mean, you cannot take anybody lightly, even though on paper and watching them for 82 games, Montreal's not in their class. The Rangers are way too inconsistent. The Islanders, if there's any penalties in the game, they're cooked. Columbus, I don't think has the goaltending, even though they have the scoring. They got guys that can score, and they're a great story. I don't think they're a good enough team to compete in the long run. But these things in the playoffs, you never know.
Bruce, it's an amazing time in the NHL and in hockey that I want to reflect on. In only a calendar year, you go from a team that snuck in to the playoffs as a minus goal differential team, a pretty good minus goal differential team in Washington.
38, I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so they snuck in by the skin of their teeth, went up against a President's Trophy Rangers, and were just swept out like last week's newspaper. And a calendar year later, like you said about the hunted and the hunter, they're no longer the hunted. They're the hunter. They're the President's Trophy team, and they're looking to sweep somebody out. I just find it amazing because we never saw this in our lifetime where teams made that drastic of a change. I give a lot of credit, like we talked about earlier, to Chris and Brian and the moves that they made, which were phenomenal. But still, I mean, isn't it amazing that they went from where they were last year to where they are this year?
It's friggin' amazing. I don't know, what other term to wait. And let's take this a step further. Their minor league club has won the Calder Cup 2 years in a row. And not one player from that minor league team of a Calder Cup winning team is on their team. And usually, if you can go back in history, and I've done this, there's usually 6 or 7 players that end up elevating to the next level within a year or two. And they got none. And they went through the free agents. They gambled right with PLD and got him. They gambled right on the trade with Chychrun and got him. Then they've made little moves like Radish and Mangiapane. All of these things have worked. Even getting Lars Eller out of Pittsburgh, and he's He's come in and solidified it. Every single move that they made has worked.
Bruce, even Anthony Beauvillier, I couldn't believe that. I go to the Islander games. Beauvillier was on the Islanders. They somehow got Vancouver to take him in the Horvat deal. He was there for about 5 minutes, and they got rid of him, and he moved on to several other teams. Now, all of a sudden in Washington, he's a valuable guy. It's phenomenal.
It is crazy, and it is to be honest, I hope he's got no family. Oh, but there's a lot of listeners that love him, but I mean, I never thought he was any good. So I can't picture him being there and being, a valuable piece. Now, is he going to play Is he going to play at all after next week? Because if Ryan Leonard comes in, they're going to play Ryan Leonard from BC. Once that season's done, he's going to sign with the Caps and he's going to be playing with them. I don't know, but he's come in and he's fit in well. Everybody seems to have fit in well. And I'll tell you, Craig Laughlin told me after about the 8th game of the season, and he says, Gabby, I've been around this team for a few years now, and this is a special group. They really get along well with each other. And he says, I think they're going to be really good. Excuse me. And they're right. And they have been really good. And, you said it earlier, they're goaltenders. One was let go by Vegas, and the other one was traded as a backup or a third goalie, and they've both become studs in 2 years. I don't know, somebody must be smiling on Ted Leonsis back there. I'm telling you, because all these moves have worked out perfectly well.
You had just mentioned Craig Laughlin, who returned to the broadcast booth Sunday in the game against Buffalo following heart surgery. So he's going to be around when Ovi breaks this record, perhaps as early as this week. So Bruce, going to put you on the spot. 4 games that they have this week. In Boston Tuesday, in Carolina Wednesday, home against Chicago on Friday, where Lord knows they're going to probably try to set him up the entire night. And then they're at the Islanders on Sunday. Does this record fall this week? A week from now, do we have a new NHL goal-scoring king?
You know what? I think this is the way I think. I think, right or wrong, I think Boston's on a 6 or 7 game losing streak, might be even more than that right now. I think they've been on a road trip. They will play really good against them, and I think it'll be a low-scoring game. Carolina will be a low-scoring game, I believe. In Chicago, they might light it up and get 4 or 5, and he might get 1 or 2. And then he's always scored against the Islanders, so I think he might come in and get 1 there. But I think it's almost going to be the way this season goes. It's either going to be in the last game of the season at home, or he's going to do it in Pittsburgh on the last game of the season. And I mean, I'd rather have him do it at home because the whole city would go nuts. But if he has to do it on the road, wouldn't it be in Pittsburgh being the place to do it? Because I can see the first person other than his teammates jumping the boards and going nuts coming over. I could see Sidney Crosby coming over, shaking his hand as the two icons since Lemieux and Gretzky left, sort of having an iconic picture together. It just seems so right to me. So I don't think he's going to do it this week, but I think because the other thing too is the Caps play like 5 games in 8 days. It's tough when you're almost 40 to get your body moving in the right direction. So I think he will do it. But I'm hoping it's the last game at home, and that doesn't mean anything, so we can really enjoy the party rather than have to worry about something the next day.
Well, before I let you go, Bruce, I just want to reflect on what Alex Ovechkin did when Fleury had his last game against the Caps. And of course, they had the Caps had lost that game, and the Capitals players were heading to the locker room when OV went and got them all to come back out on the ice, and for everybody to shake Fleury's hand and congratulate him on his career, while the Minnesota Wild players applauded what they did, and that was all because of Ovechkin and the class that he has in doing that as the captain of the team.
Yeah, and you know what? He has grown so much as a captain. In his early years, I mean, he was the captain because, like, I remember when we traded Chris Clark and George said, what do you think? And I said, I think this is Ovi's team. We got to make him captain. So we made him captain. But in reality, all the stuff that captains do, sort of Mike Knuble did that for a couple of years. Like, I mean, the in dressing room stuff and everything. Ovi was the captain by leading by example. Now you could tell the growth of him by what he did with Marc-Andre the other day. Like, I mean, that's all him. That's him gathering it, him showing the hockey world what hockey means to everybody, and showing that class was perfect. But to me, the first thing I thought of was the growth of Alex as just a superstar player into a superstar ambassador to the game, and that stayed with it. It's going to stay with me for a long time.
Well, Bruce, my mom's gone. Your dad's gone. I love them dearly, and I had so many conversations with my mom about you and the player you were over all those different years and levels that we played each other. And I remember your dad in George Bell Arena like yesterday. I really do. And I'm standing up at the top there where the railing was and watching you play. And having you on here brings back a lot of emotions for me from my life in hockey. And I really appreciate you doing this.
No, it was my pleasure, Neil. I'm sorry you couldn't get on sooner, but I'm really glad to hook up with you and see you again, because it's been a while. And I can say good luck in this. I'm glad you guys are doing this. Let's keep hockey alive. And it was a great memory. When you mention George Bell to me, like, I'll be thinking about that all day. And the first thing after a game, wanting to go get a hot dog. And my dad said, you're allowed one hot dog after a game. And when the Marlies played Butter Beeps or Young Nats, and how the games, whether it was at the George Bell, whether it was at where did we play?
Ted Reeve, or else in Leaside Arena.
Any of those arenas, just playing, and how good the games were, and how much fun they were, putting on a red jersey or me putting on a blue jersey. It was all cool. Great memories. Yeah.
And the parents made it. When you think about how much the parents sacrificed to have their kids have a good minor hockey life, it's great. And it's great that we're both still doing it and still talking about it and still loving it. And we also have a connection through the Johnstown Chiefs, but I won't get into that right now because I'm sure people don't want to hear about that. I owned the Johnstown Chiefs, and Gabby played for the Johnstown Jets and was in Slapshot. So there you go. But that's a whole nother show, Gabby. That's a whole other show we got.
It is another show, and when you owned it, you should have built a new arena. I was there this summer, and it's the same old arena.
Well, thanks for doing this, and good luck along the way. We'll be watching you.
All right, take care. Thanks, guys, for having me.
Such a great chat with Bruce Boudreau, and he had mentioned, Neil, about Alex Ovechkin also being the hunter as opposed to the hunted. And in Sunday's game against Buffalo, he stapled Sam Lafferty against the glass so hard that the blade popped out of Lafferty's skate. So even at his age, still able to lay the wood to his opponents.
Oh, he's a force. There's no doubt about that. He doesn't look that much different than he did 10, 15 years ago. Still a force in the league.
And Bruce, as always, looked great, sounded great, and the memories that you two have going back well over a half a century, it's for me just to sit there and listen to them is great.
I mean, how many times do you get to talk to somebody that you met, say, 55 years ago? I mean, it's incredible, really. And it can't help but bring back a lot of emotional memories.
Yet, along with the history great perspective on the present, the OV record, the OV pursuit, and hopefully Boudreau gave our listeners, and I think he did, plenty of insight into the type of player that he was early and how he has evolved today.
That's for sure.
So with that, we're going to transition over to the Eastern Conference race. And we talk so much about this term that I coined early on, the mosh pit of mediocrity. And all you need to know are the records over the last 10 games of the bubble teams. Ottawa, 6-3-1, secure in the first wild card. Montreal, 4-3-3, they are in the second wild card. Besides that, in the last 10, the Rangers are 4-5-1, Columbus 3-6-1, Detroit 4-6-0, and the Islanders 3-4-3. And for fans out there, you wonder why the projection point is so low. And when you watch these teams and where their shortcomings are, literally on a night-to-night basis, it's not hard to figure out why.
And the thing is, the reason why the number is so low, the projection of what it's going to take to get in the playoffs, is because those playoff teams that are secure in the playoffs are always beating the teams that are trying to get into the playoffs, so they can't get that number up. If they were like the St. Louis Blues on the Western side, that's a different story. Then the number is going to grow, but it doesn't grow when these teams that are trying to get in there can't win their games.
86.5 points in the East. So somebody's got to get to 87, and Ottawa is almost there, and then throw a tarp around the other 5 to see who's actually going to qualify. We'll get into more of that with short shifts on Wednesday. Over to the Western side, Minnesota and St. Louis are now tied with 87 points. And we mentioned at the top of the show, Minnesota has played one fewer game. They may start getting some help back with Kaprizov and Eriksson coming. But the Blues have literally pulled away from the Flames and the Canucks, and there's literally no margin for error for the two teams in Canada to try to squeeze their way in.
Isn't it amazing that it's, instead of being St. Louis, it's actually Vancouver and Calgary that are singing the blues?
You were waiting for that. It's funny because the Canucks had this long road trip. They did finish 2-2-2, but it's the kind of trip that in reality, they needed to come out of that with probably at least 2 more points. And even though they have a game in hand on St. Louis, and even if they win that game, it still only gets them within 4, and they're not going to win the regulation tiebreaker either. So they're going to have to actually beat the Blues outright.
Yeah, it's really coming down to it's coming down, as they say, to the short hairs now. You're going to have to win. Vancouver does have Demko back in the net, who's making a difference, but they're still not the team they were last year, and far cry from what they were last year.
Top of the conference, going to go to the Central Division. Winnipeg holding a 6-point lead over the Dallas Stars. Dallas has played one fewer game, and the two teams do meet one more time in Dallas on April 10th. So if both teams continue to win, Dallas wins that game in hand and the game against Winnipeg, they would only have to win one more game than Winnipeg the rest of the year to get the top spot in that Central Division, because they would have the win tiebreaker. So I think Dallas is a club that's really flying under the radar right now. They've won 5 in a row. They look terrific. They're playing in Seattle on Monday, another winnable game for them. So Jim Nill's club, remember we talked earlier in the season with him and they weren't quite where he wanted them to be. I think it's a different story now.
Yeah, I think so. I think they're topping out at the right time. You might want to say. Interesting that they've got this it's like college hockey. They go into Seattle on a Saturday night, play Seattle, and then wait around and play them again on Monday night and don't leave town. And that's happened a few times in the NHL. I'm always amazed, though, when I see it. It's like, I always think it's a scheduling quirk, but it's not. And then after they're finished with Seattle, they don't have a lot of heavyweights. Dallas doesn't. I mean, they play Nashville, they play Pittsburgh, they're in Minnie, they play Vancouver, and then they get that Winnipeg game. So, yeah, it's doable. It really is doable. And Winnipeg's going to have to win their games to stay atop the whole conference.
Amongst the boredom of the possibility of LA and Edmonton meeting for the fourth straight season, the intrigue is really in whether or not this time the Kings can get home ice advantage. They lead the Oilers by 2 points. Both teams have 9 games left. The Kings will win the regulation tiebreaker. And the Oilers starting out on a 4-game road trip. No McDavid, no Ekholm, no Klingberg, no Skinner. And it's going to start off in Vegas. And then they play the 3 California clubs, including a game against the Kings in Los Angeles on Saturday, where the Kings just set a franchise record on Sunday with their 27th home win. They're 27-4-4. Lost to Toronto Saturday, and then took it out on San Jose Sunday.
Oh, those poor Shockies. But, LA could surprise. I mean, they can score goals now. You normally look at LA's games and see 2-1, 3-1, 3-2. And now, all of a sudden, in the last couple of games, they've been high scoring. And in fact, they did that against Carolina, too. They beat them 7-2. So they can score goals now suddenly. Watch out, because the way they can play defense and their strength at home, I mean, unless you're going to run the table, even if they don't get home ice, the other team has to run the table at home on their home. So it'll be really interesting to see the LA Kings in this year's playoffs.
Want to talk Buffalo Sabres?
Oh, God.
Well, here's why. And, you think people might say, well, you guys are repetitive at how maddening it is when the Sabres play up to their potential and then they don't. But here's what we're talking about. And maybe this is why we actually know what we're talking about to some degree. They fall short of exiting the Eastern Conference cellar. And how did they do that? Well, they were on the verge of getting out on Saturday, playing in Philadelphia, and they were a point behind the Flyers. So what do? They lose 7-4 in Philly, and now the deficit to get out of the cellar is 3 points. But on Sunday, they go in and they win 8-5 in Washington.
Against a rested Capitals team.
Yeah.
So you don't know what you're going to get with the Sabres from night to night. I mean, they do have talent, but they don't always put it all together and use it. I mean, Alex Tuck has had the season of his life, and so has Tage Thompson. And they've got a terrific franchise player in Rasmus Dahlin. Even James Reimer in goal as a backup goalie has found new life. But it's too little too late for the Sabres.
They still do have a possibility of getting themselves out of that last place spot in the East. They're only 3 points behind Pittsburgh and 1 point behind both the Bruins and the Flyers, and they have games in hand on all of them. So let's see if there's a storyline yet to be completed there with Buffalo. Hey, remember when we talked about players being too nice? And speaking of the Sabres, it happened in a game that they played against the Golden Knights back on March 15th when Tomas Hertl, on an empty net opportunity, tried to pass backwards to Jack Eichel for an empty net goal against his former club, which would seal the game. And then ensuing face-off down in the Vegas end, Sabres tie the game, win it in a shootout. This happened again over the weekend with Nikita Kucherov, one of the true elite players in the NHL, twice with an empty net against the New York Islanders, tried to make a back pass in his own end to Eric Chernak, who was on his forehand, and the Islanders wound up getting a scoring opportunity from right in front. And then with a chance to shoot at the empty net, passes to Brandon Hagel, and that went awry. So now he's got to bust it down the ice on the back check, and then later negated an icing before setting up an empty net goal for Jake Gensel. So just goes to show, sometimes being selfish is the right thing.
I was watching that game, and I couldn't believe that Kucherov didn't just shoot it into the net. He wanted to get the puck to Hagel, and man, oh man, I mean, it was worse in the Vegas game because they ended up losing the game. Vegas did. When Hurdle didn't score into the empty net, they actually lost the game. At least the Lightning didn't lose the game when Kucherov did this the other night. But you're right. It's crazy. I can't imagine if I was a coach what I would say.
What are you going to say to Kucherov, even if you're John Cooper at this point?
Yeah, but you've got to say to him, Coach, you can't do that. You can't do that, man. You got to be selfish and we got to win these games.
And at the end of the shift, he had to be committed to playing a 200-foot game when he was already tired. So
yeah, no, right? You're right.
So from being too nice to a couple of hits that I didn't like. Actually, it's one hit and it's one incident. Saturday, Nikita Zadorov of the Bruins had a very late hit in the neutral zone against the Wings' Jonathan Berggren. And it wasn't quite the predatory hit that Dale Hunter laid on Pierre Turgeon in the playoffs in 1993. But the time from when Berggren let the puck go, from when the hit was laid on him, that left a pretty sour taste in my mouth, seeing that.
And you can really injure a guy when you hit him late. We've all seen late hits, and it's no fun, particularly when you're playing in a game. This is not a playoff game. Boston's well out of the playoffs, so you've got to wonder. Zadorov has played with an edge, though, while he's been with Boston, and maybe that's what they've wanted out of him. They want him to play with that mean edge because he's a giant out there.
But when a player's not expecting that hit and he's got the puck.
I agree. Totally agree.
Right?
Totally agree.
This one really sucked. At the end of the Panthers' loss to the Canadiens on Sunday, Nico Mikkola, with a second left on the clock and the puck in the Panthers' end, instead of just eating it and letting the clock run out, took a slap shot all the way down the ice, and it whizzed right past the head of David Savard of the Canadiens, and that set off a little bit of a fracas at the end of the game. And, oh, by the way, these two teams meet Tuesday in Montreal. But I thought that was a total Bush move.
Well, that slap shot cost Mr. Mikkola $5,000 because that's what the player safety has fined him for unsportsmanlike conduct at the end of that game. So he didn't get off the hook from doing that, and he may have to pay a price again, as you said, on Tuesday night in La Belle Province.
$5,000 for stupidity. Some player notes. Let's pick up on the Montreal theme. Lane Hudson had 3 assists in that win over the Panthers, and brothers Quinn and Cole had a goal and an assist each, leading BU, the alma mater of Al Morganti, to a 3-2 overtime win over Cornell for a spot in the NCAA Frozen Four. Quinn had the overtime winner, and Cole was the tournament MVP. And Caden Gooley for the Canadians, and kind of overlooked this on Friday on short shifts, returned last Thursday after missing 21 games with a lacerated right quadricep. He actually cut himself falling into the boards on January 28th. And that's an injury we don't see happen too often, where a guy actually injures himself that severely.
Yeah, his 1 foot skate cut into the other quadricep, and that's ugly. But thank God he's back and he's okay.
Jacob Trouba of Anaheim missed Sunday's game with Toronto after an awkward fall into the boards. Friday against the Rangers, first game against his former club, he fell over Igor Shesterkin's stick and kind of went spread eagle. So he's listed as day-to-day and sat out last night. And then Jimmy Snuggerud, forward for St. Louis, has just signed an entry-level contract. He is practicing with the Blues on Monday, and the Blues are opening a 3-game homestand on Tuesday. He's a Hobey Baker finalist. His University of Minnesota Golden Gophers were eliminated by UMass on Thursday, but 24 goals, 27 assists, and 51 points in 40 games. Pretty good year. Hobey Baker Award will be presented in St. Louis at the Frozen Four on April 11th, so maybe even a little bit more help coming to Jim Montgomery and the Blues.
Yeah, and see if he can fit in and be additive at this very, very late stage in the season.
This is the human side of the story, and on Friday, Brad Marchand made his debut as a Florida Panther in a game against Utah Hockey Club. He assisted on Bennett's overtime game-winning goal, and the two of them played together on Team Canada in the Four Nations face-off. But if you rewind back a little further, it was Bennett who knocked out Marchand in Game 3 of their second-round series last year. It was really a sneak punch, which several TV outlets actually had to look at reverse angles to actually see what had taken place. The Bruins were outraged, and rightfully so. Marchand missed games 4 and 5 of that series, and the Bruins wound up falling to the Panthers eventually in Game 6. But this is one of these situations where you see players that have had somewhat salty relationships as opponents, and then they become teammates. And you were general manager. Do you recall any instances that you would have when you picked up a player with a known grudge against another player?
Well, the one that comes most to mind is I had Kevin Stevens on the Rangers, came in from Los Angeles and acquired that famous Islander defenseman, Rich Pilon. And Rich Pilon had been the one that had broken Stevens' face, basically, with a hit earlier in their careers. And you wondered how that would go along. But they became friends, like all hockey players do. And then, I remember when LaFontaine, I got him from Buffalo, and he came in, and he had not had a good relationship with John Muckler, who was our coach. And but that worked its way through. And even getting Luc Robitaille onto the Rangers when Wayne Gretzky was on the team. And those two, there seemed to be something going back to the LA days when they were together. So that's one thing about hockey players. If once they're on the same team, everything's forgotten about. They just go about their business.
And you mentioned the Pilon Stevens incident, which was more of a happenstance collision in Game 7 of their playoff series between the Penguins and the Islanders in 1993. And that actually ended the run for the Penguins after winning consecutive cups in 91 and 92, where Pilon happened to get Stevens high, and Stevens, I think, was out before he hit the ice. And he, as you had said, went face first and literally broke his face. And that was really a hockey play gone wrong.
Oh yeah, it wasn't a dirty check. The other one that I remember famously is Cam Neely and Ulf Samuelsson. It was thought that Ulf Samuelsson's dirty hit on Cam Neely gave him a thigh contusion, where it ended up calcifying and led to the end of his career. The weird part about that one was, although Neely obviously on the Bruins and Samuelsson on the Penguins, they both had the same agent. Cam Neely and Ulf Samuelsson. So that was another one there that you wondered how how that would go if the agent had a party in the summer and those two saw each other.
I don't think those two could have been good teammates with each other, given that history, and that Neely's knee was really what ended his career.
Yeah, and it was that calcification. But then again, there's been lots of hits to the thigh and to the knee that doesn't end up calcifying. And so this was just one of those bad things. And last thing I'll bring up is, will we ever forget the Dennis Potvin non-hit, really, on Ulf Nilsson, where he caught a rut in the garden ice that is so bad and ended up breaking his leg. And everybody said it was the Potvin's hit that did it, when if you watch that replay, it's not. And to this day, and we're in 2025, and that happened in the 70s, to this day, that is the reason that the chant at MSG is Potvin sucks. Of course, most of the audience doesn't even know who Potvin is.
The hit was clean. The ice was crap. And also remember that back in those days, Ulf Nilsson wore that molded plastic Lang boot that had absolutely no give in it. So again, hockey play gone wrong.
Yep, for sure.
Want to remind you of one other thing before we let the Samuelsson thing drop. You had acquired him in a trade, and Ty Domi, who you once had, was playing in Toronto, and Domi knocked Samuelsson out with his sucker punch.
Yeah, and I was outraged at that. And I started Ty's career in New York. I mean, he played for us. That started his whole career. I ended up trading him to Winnipeg, and from Winnipeg he went to Toronto, and then we had Ulf Samuelsson, and Ty knocked him out. But here's what Ulf Samuelsson's like. I went down to the locker room after the game, and I told Samuelsson how furious and upset I was about that. And he said, it's my fault. I should have known who was around me. I should be more aware. Unbelievable.
There is something about the nobility of hockey players 99% of the time that still astonishes.
It is. It truly is.
And to bring this full circle, Marchand and Bennett now kissing cousins as the Panthers look to defend their Stanley Cup crown.
Yeah.
That will wrap up a terrific show for today. Thanks to Al Morganti and Bruce Boudreau for joining us. Thanks to UBS Financial Services, Inc., NHL Wraparound, and UBS Financial Services, Inc. are not affiliated. UBS is a sponsor of 3 things you need to pay attention to. No other affiliation, relationship, or endorsement is made, suggested, intended, or should be implied or inferred between UBS and VNS Productions, LLC, or any of the individuals or businesses and or their respective products and services appearing in this program. Thank you to our listeners. Send questions or comments to NHLWraparound@gmail.com. You can also reach us individually, Neil at NHLWraparound.com or Vic at NHLWraparound.com. All of our podcasts, audio and video, available on all platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Amazon, iHeartRadio, Spotify, YouTube, and our complete catalog can be found on our website, NHLWraparound.com. So subscribe, like us, and also check out some of our shorter clips on X at NHL Wraparound. New York Centric, coming Tuesday, short shifts, Wednesday.
Thanks for joining us on the NHL Wraparound podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on all the NHL action.